Hey everyone, I'm starting a new series in which I will be breaking down all of my cubing world records, past and present, in chronological order. Especially for the beginning of the series, these aren't really meant to be used as example solves. Rather, I hope to showcase how my big blind solves have evolved from early 2018 to the present day. For episode 1, we'll be looking at my 129.42 four blind single from Cubing USA Great Lakes Championship 2018. Hope you enjoy. I'm not really going to be going over tracing in this series because it's not a skill you can represent productively in the form of a breakdown. But I will skim over what cycle breaks I chose. So with that, let's get started. Immediately, the biggest difference that you'll see in this solve versus my modern big blind solves is that I use different buffers than I do now. In fact, I used UBL for corners, DFR for wings, and UBR for centers. So essentially mirroring what we use in the beginner and intermediate big blind methods. At the time, it was known that UFR buffers would provide an advantage over that, but nobody had really bothered to make the switch at Big Blind, at least within the community of fast people. So, first of all, with regards to orientation, we have three bars on this cube. We have a yellow, a green, and a red. Since I'm white top, green front, yellow is my bottom color, so I put that on bottom immediately. Red's on top, so I can't really fix that without breaking the yellow. So I just put the green in front, and so I have two solved center bars, and this one we couldn't really solve just due to how it's placed on the cube. For corners, there were two cycles. So we have one cycle gets to here, goes back to UBL. I broke to UBR, which is the correct cycle break in the majority of cases. But overall, corners are very straightforward, just four algs. For wings, we have two solved wings in these two positions. So yeah, wings were pretty easy overall. Most of the pieces formed one cycle, but there is this two swap left over right here. So that is something that I'm gonna have to deal with in the solve. And then centers were just one cycle. If you're avoiding U-face centers, it's almost always possible to solve them as just one cycle. If you want to trace out the solve for yourself, feel free to do so. I'm not really going to be doing that myself for the series. I don't think it'd be productive. Anyway, to get started with execution, started by executing centers. So we have UBR buffer to here to here. What I did was I rotated here, U2, insert that commutator. Immediately, this illustrates what's going to be kind of a recurring theme throughout this solve. My comms, and in fact, most people's big blind comms at the time were a lot closer to BH than the modern approach. People hadn't really adapted their algs to new hardware at the time, so you'll see a lot of algs like this where I rotate into an 8 mover instead of, perhaps in this case it would be pretty simple to do a 9 mover without rotating, but that wasn't really explored at the time. Anyway, to continue, we have UBR to here to here. I did D2 to put this down here, and then I rotated, so we have an interchange between UBR and here, and then this pure, undo. And at the same time, while the community hadn't really adapted the algs to new hardware, I just really didn't have good algs for a lot of cases in the first place. So, like center comms, I largely improvised, and as a result, you'll see things like this, where you'll see a face turn setup move into a rotation. It's really inefficient stuff. That was a big point of improvement for me at the time. And speaking of which, next comm we have here to here to here, L prime to set up this interchange, and I rotated. It should be pretty obvious that there was another 8 mover that didn't involve rotating, but at the time, the logic you would see on the most commonly used commutator sheet for Big Blind was Marcel Andre's sheet, and you would see a lot of cases where rotating into 8 quarter turns would be favored over no rotation 10 quarter turns, and this was kind of logic that I hadn't really played around with at the time, so I just kind of accepted this. and you'll see algs like that. But yeah, in hindsight, that really was kind of a careless alg, and I could have very easily done the LU2L prime insert. But anyway, onto here, to here, to here, we have just, I did this 9 mover, which, yeah, that's not a bad alg. You could do L prime DL in order to make it an 8 mover, but overall the 9 mover wasn't a terrible solution, and you could make a case for that being better for right-handed solvers. Anyway, next alg, here to here to here. I did a D setup and then this. Wow. Okay, yeah, you can't even really call this one 3 style. That's just using that's just using U2. There's not really much to that one. That's, oh gosh. Yeah, one of the main takeaways here is that you don't really have to optimize very much to get like a 129. Anyway, here to here to here. Just rotate it into this 8 mover. That rotation, while it's avoidable, you can do a 9 mover, sorry. That one isn't particularly terrible. Not much to say there, really. We have now here to here to here, which we did just the pure. And then for this case, what I did was I appended UFR. So that looks like this. But what you could do instead is U prime, or as a U setup into this pseudo 2 swap, and that's a little bit faster overall, but this isn't a terrible way to solve the case, and it's not really too problematic considering other things that went on in the solve. Next thing I solved was corners. So here we have UBL to FUR to BDL. Yeah, so I did a double rotation like this into an 8 mover. Yeah, even for corners, I hadn't really committed to learning rotationless comms, which led to some pretty nasty solutions. And instead what we could do for this case, right, is U R prime U prime. And that's a UFR alg as well. Doesn't have any complicated logic behind that. It's just something I hadn't really put any time into at the time. Anyway, UBL, RDF, DFL. I did a Z prime into an 8 mover. You have a few options for this one, and the one I'd probably choose if I were using UBL nowadays is wide style 8 mover. But yeah, so now we cycle break to UBR, and then here I did the 8 mover. Then we have here to here to here, and that's just Niklas. So that solves corners, and I guess one interesting to note is that because I did all of my comms as 8 moves in HTM, it is, I actually, in a technical sense, used the BH method for corners. It's not really a good thing, but it's interesting. Yeah, let's move on to wings. So we have DFR to here to here. So yeah, I did RU prime to set up this R2 slice interchange like that. And wings were, and I think still are, the piece type for which I had invested, the most effort into my comms. They're still pretty mediocre in this solve, but they aren't as bad as like my centers and corners. In addition, I was still using DFR, so there's not a whole lot you can do for some of the cases, but I'd put more work in than my other piece types. So we have DFR to here, did a Z prime into the 8 mover, pretty simple case. Then we have here to here to here. I did 8 mover like this, nothing much to say. It's not a terrible alg. I have here to here to here. I did 3U wide prime to set up an R2 and put this back here, so I don't have to rotate. That's not really the greatest alg ever. You could just do a U prime instead and then do like R prime like that. But I guess considering the level of optimization everything else had, it wasn't the worst thing that could have happened ever. Now you have here to here to here, the R2 user's nightmare. So I did U, L wide 2 to set these up here, and then I rotated. Again, considering what you saw in the centers and corners, Not terrible, but yeah, there's pretty easy improvements to be made. Just sticking with like this U setup to bring this out of the way, you can do like this 9 mover with that. There's a lot of options. I'm just kind of showing one right now. So yeah, it can do something like that. But anyway, moving on, we have here to here to here. Get ready to cringe, guys, because I used R2 for this. I'm not joking. Go look at the solve yourself. That's what I did. I really incorporated R2 into a world record 4 blind solve. This case isn't even bad for 3 style. What you can do is R wide D prime. You have this R2 interchange like that. And okay, I did that backwards. But you get the point. It solves the cycle. Like, it's a good alg, but in the moment, I couldn't really think of any good comms to solve it, so I defaulted to R2. In a competition, it's an okay way to kind of back up this sort of scenario, but when solving at home, I would 100% recommend pausing to recall the alg. It's much healthier in the long run, but this is what happened in the solve. Can't rewrite history. Yeah, R2 in a world record. Let's go. Anyway, if here to here to here, I did B2 to set up the U layer per special. Like that, nothing much to say. Now we have here to here to here. I rotated into an 8 mover. Now we have here to here to here, rotated into an 8 mover once again. And then now we have this as our last target on the DFR cycle, and we have this 2 swap that I mentioned earlier. I think I actually handled this pretty well, because what I did was I broke to RUB first, and I did this alg, which, yeah, it's actually a good alg used in this solve, finally. It's been a while since we've seen one of those. But then we just leave this pair of pieces right here. So I did a U-wide setup, and that, and the solve is completed. To give some statistics on this solve, memo was about 36.7 and execution was about 52.7. The solve comes out to about 4.16 STPS. It's 219 moves, and it was 23 alg, so it was slightly better than average, boosted by the fact that the alg dropped was in wings rather than, for example, corners. Wings are the most complex piece to trace at a high level due to how deep like cycle break theory can be. So as far as 23 algers go, it did end up being kind of on the more straightforward side, but yeah, there's nothing wrong with getting a 23 alger officially. It's not that lucky. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the breakdown. Let me know what you'd like to see for the next episode, or anything blind solving related you'd like me to cover. And please subscribe for future content. Thanks for watching.